Okay guys, this is the instructional video on how to put together your pellet gauge. Again, the pellet gauge ships with this instruction sheet, and it has a little bit of info about the pellet gauge, and this is sufficient. If you read this, you will have enough information to put this together correctly. But let's just do the video so that you have a visual tool as well as a written one. Now this is how the pellet gauge ships. A little plastic bag, a little bit tight, but it pops right out of there. Now this ships stacked in an order that does matter. So I suggest when you pull it out, you just leave it all stacked together. There's not one good reason to unstack this. So I would suggest pull it out just like this and sit it down and don't mix it up. If you do, it's not a giant deal. The top plate obviously has a big hole in the middle of it. The guide plate, this is what I'm calling the guide plate, I don't know if that's actually what it's called, goes on top, and it's plastic, and it has pellet gauge insignia and caliber etched into it, so it's pretty obvious. And now the actual sheet of the gauge, the metal part, the actual gauge itself, and then the back is another, I believe, exact copy of the top bezel. But again, that's how it stacks, so if you mess it up, here you go. That's how you put it back together. There we go. It's all stacked back in its orientation. And if you notice, there are some scallops cut in the bezel, and that is on purpose. There's a good reason for that, and we'll get to that in a minute here. Now inside is another bag with the hardware. Now you do not need a single tool to assemble your pellet gauge. In fact, it is recommended you do not use a tool, and we won't. We will not use any tools for this. You will get 4 screws, 4 washers, and 4 really long nuts that turn into table legs like magic. Now the order here is screw, washer, and then you just kind of want to roughly align the holes here and put your screw right in like that. So again, the washers go on the top. It goes in like that. No washer on the bottom. And you can just take one of your nuts and very loosely thread it on. Do not tighten it completely yet. You'll just have to unloosen it in a minute anyway. But anyway, that is the order of operations here. In case you missed that, it goes screw, washer, and then through the pellet gauge. And we very loosely spin on our nut, our leg. However you choose to describe it is okay with me. Clipped my fingernails today. A little hard to grab them washers. And if you choose, you can stick these all through and then put the nuts on if you find that's more efficient. But you can also drop your screws, so be careful. But if you do drop them, you can just rewind and you'll know how they go back together again. So now we have a loosely assembled pellet gauge, but you are not done, because there are layers on here that can conflict. They can create a blockage on your pellet gauge. So you must align these. Now don't be scared. Don't be scared. That's what these little scallops are for. Remember those? Now all we have to do is grab it relatively by a scallop, front and or back, and what you want to make sure of is that nothing is interfering with the hole in the metal gauge. So if there's any plastic blocking that metal gauge, then you're going to have an impediment, and you can't have that. You want the pellets to just easily drop through there. So basically you want to center the gauge hole in the guide plate's hole, because the guide plate's hole is larger than the gauge hole. And you can easily, now I have some weird lights going on here, but you can easily line this up by sight, and then all you do is start tightening your legs slowly. Check it, make sure that looks good to me. You'll want to see the metal shining through the hole in the plastic, that's all. And just by hand, you know, use a little pressure, push it with your finger or something on the screw head, and turn the leg, the nut, and it will tighten up sufficiently by hand. You do not need to use a tool. If you do, say to yourself, well, I'll just get me a screwdriver and a wrench and tighten this sucker good, there is an extremely likely chance that you will bust this plastic. So I would recommend not doing that. By hand is sufficient. And there you have a fully assembled pellet gauge. Go sort some pellets, guys.